I do want to talk about protein and diets. When was the first time you heard about a carnivore diet?
2016, when Sean Baker started doing it.
2016. That's early, man.
Yeah, so I saw it. I was watching it. Listen, carnivore diet should sound absolutely insane to you when you never heard about it. When you first hear about it, it should be like the most insane thing ever because you've been told your whole life something else. But also, then you start looking at your own life quality and you start realizing that, all right, well, I don't feel the best I ever felt. Like, yes, I'm exhausted. I sleep 9 hours a day, 10 hours a day, and I'm still exhausted. I'm 35% body fat. I'm insulin resistant. My blood pressure's through the roof. I look back and I live life in hidings. I'm not out there pursuing things, but I'm hiding in shadows. Let's just give it a shot. Let's see if this carnivore diet is going to help me because I probably tried every single diet in the world. I've done paleo, I've been vegan, I've done keto, I've done carb cycling. When I got to the point where I'm going to have everything with moderation, because that's normal, you can have a little bit of this and that, and you start convincing yourself that every new diet plan or food plan you find is pretty much the right decision for you because you do not have knowledge. Now, if you do have knowledge about human organism, you are not lost. You're not running away from one meal plan to the other one, to the other one, to the other one, because you understand how body works, what are two essential macronutrients, which is protein and fat. Carbohydrates are not essential, absolutely not necessary for a human organism. Body produces sugar on its own. The consumption of carbohydrate is not necessary. The body does have ability to process carbohydrates, yes, but now we're running into more issues as the population is consuming more and more carbohydrates because the thing number one that is destroying our population is insulin resistance. That's what it all starts with the insulin resistance. Almost everybody is insulin resistant to a certain degree in the United States and people who I talk to. Now, what is insulin resistance? It's when the cells start rejecting the energy. So what's going to happen with all that energy that's insulin carrying when the cell actually rejects it because you've been beating up the receptor on that cell for so long? Well, the insulin has to deliver that energy somewhere. And it stores that energy right in your fat cells around the waistline. And your waistline is just massive, big, and fat. And you see people with all these big stomachs, that is pretty much a standard in 2023 in the United States, thinking that it's normal, thinking that it's okay. And that's actually a metabolic disease. Like, we have to understand the importance of being insulin sensitive. Like insulin sensitivity is the exact opposite from the insulin resistance. And insulin sensitivity pretty much keeps you away from the morbid obesity, which is then associated with many, many more risk factors towards the heart disease and other metabolic disease. So when we look at people these days, they're insulin resistant, they don't stop eating the foods they're eating, then they're making them insulin resistant, which is a lot of seed oils and sugars and alcohol all combined in one portion. Average portion of a person might be burger, fries, and some Coke, which is just a bunch of trans fat, seed oils, a sugar, and you get tiny bit of protein that is pretty much just going to get lost in all the cons of that meal. And people eat it, they turn insulin resistant, and body is in a state where it only takes very little energy for presence. That's pretty much insulin resistance. Body doesn't take much energy for present situation. It stores it for future. And now here's the reason why. Human organism didn't have sufficient amount of calories through the evolution. When we go back to Homo habilis, to Homo erectus, to Neanderthals, to Homo sapiens, our ancestors did not have a chance to have a sufficient amount of 4,000 calories every single day and just have fun by the fire. There were days when they didn't eat at all. There were days where they were feasting, and insulin resistance was pretty much created right before winter. So when the nature has produced enough fruit in a certain parts of the world only, also if you're in a part of the world where it's cold and it's freezing, you're not getting any fruit, which is pretty much protein and fat 365. But where you find fruit, remember, you're still competing with other organisms, and then you're competing with insects and mold and all that stuff that is going to pretty much take over the fruit as well. So you got to be very quick to find it. But when you find it in the good amounts, your body turns insulin resistant. Bears deliver themselves type 2 diabetes before every winter.
Yeah.
Just so they can store as much body fat as possible so they can get through the winter, because winter means one thing. calorie deficiency. There's always a calorie deficiency during winter time because hunting is a lot harder when there's 4 or 5 feet of snow and when the visibility is very low. So the body is pretty much getting ready for this period, and over millions of years, it had created this beautiful, helpful resistance, the insulin resistance, so it can store enough body fat. So the body will pretty much use very little energy for a current situation. It will make you feel exhausted. You're gonna feel tired because you're not getting energy for presence. And then you're storing the body fat that you're going to live off of for the future months in the winter. But the problem with the insulin resistance, it's only meant to last a month and a half, and then more winter is here and body starts eating up its body fat. Well, these days, people live in insulin resistance for 20, 30 years. And we actually had a conference with Hall and one of the other professionals, he was a neurology professional on a human brain, that is taking care of the patients with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and dementia, and he swears that pretty much all these disease on the brain is caused by the insulin resistance.
Yeah.
The brain didn't get the energy, so it got sick. That's simple. You didn't feed the brain for the last 15 years properly. You felt terribly for the last 15 years. So you were slowly degrading the health of your brain until your brain got sick because it didn't have ability to get a sufficient amount of energy that it needed. So how do you cure insulin resistance? You switch the mechanisms. You stop consuming massive amounts of sugar and carbohydrates, and you let the brain feed off of ketones. And you let your body get fat adapted. That's how you cure insulin resistance.
That was one of the best explanations I've ever heard about insulin resistance. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's wonderful. The cool thing about all of that, like you said, carbohydrates are not essential. So we start eating more fats and proteins and eat less or none of the carbohydrates. Our bodies do fat adapt. And then this magical thing starts to happen. Like, I think a lot of people understand that, like, or maybe they've heard that, like, fasting is a really good thing for them. And they try to do fasting, but they're not able to do it because they're so hungry and hangry and moody, and their cravings are through the roof, and they just can't execute a fast. Where people that try eating this way, especially on a carnivore diet, they fast effortlessly, easily. Like, it's almost an inconvenience to go eat. It's time consuming. People are just simply not hungry. They got to go about their day and do all kinds of things. So can you explain why fasting is such a great tool and why it should only really be used when you are fat adapted, especially on a carnivore diet?
So most importantly, if you want to live life with a carbohydrate consumption, you must develop insulin metabolic flexibility. That means that your body will start consuming glucose when the glucose is in presence and ketones when the glucose is not in presence. Meaning you can switch from fat adaptation to the glucose consumption, and when the glucose is gone, body is calm, goes back to the fat consumption. How do you achieve that? Well, one great way to achieve that is intermittent fasting. During the feed-in time, when you eat your meal and the meal includes some carbohydrates, your body's processing the glucose. Now that glucose is not going to last forever. It runs out at a certain degree. And then the body switches into a ketogenic state and starts burning off fat without really any problems, any hunger, and feeling that makes you upset and anxious, because when you are carbohydrate addicted, you can't really go without carbohydrates for a long period of time. You get sweaty, start getting shaky, start getting hungry, hangry. In certain degrees, you get hyperglycemia, which is the drop in the blood sugar levels. And that's very unhealthy. I mean, a healthy human should never get to the point of hyperglycemia for no reason. You're way too sugar addicted, which means your body is pretty much incapable of producing its own glucose, because why should it? You've been feeding it sugar every single time you got hungry. So the gluconeogenesis, the process that is designed to create sugar in your liver, is not even necessary for the past 15 years. Because every time you get hungry, boom, sugar. You get hungry, boom, sugar. So that's why you start feeling sick. And you feel like, oh, I wouldn't be able to go without food for 8 to 10 hours. I would die. Yes, with the current state of your metabolism, you wouldn't feel great. You wouldn't die. Nobody would die, but you wouldn't feel great. Let's put it this way. But if we make you fat adapted, now you can go long periods of time, 8, 10, 20 hours. Now, currently, I'm 70 hours fasted. I have not eaten for the last 70 hours. Okay, that's a 3-day fast that I'm doing right now. I'm gonna break my fast after this podcast. I work out first, which is completely fine. I work out after 70 hours of not eating. Okay, and I
Think
still
about that
perform
for the
very well.
listener. Think about that. Think about that. That's so important to say. Thank you.
Yeah, so right after this, I can still beat my previous performance. Yesterday, when I exercised, I was 48 hours faster than I beat my previous performance because
Yep.
my body is using up stored body fat for the fuel. And I feel amazing because the ketones are the primary source of the energy. So my muscles live off of the ketones too. I experience no performance deficiency. So I don't consume carbohydrates on daily anymore. I used to. I cut them out completely. My life quality is a lot better without the carbohydrates, and I put on a lot leaner mass. Like I eat a lot of fat, a lot of protein, and my physique is a lot tighter and better looking on protein and fat only. Every single time, especially at this fat adaptation state, if I consume a lot of carbohydrates, I get puffy and watery very quickly because that's not my preferred source of energy anymore. So my body overreacts every single time I consume carbohydrates. That's another thing to recognize is that once when you're running strictly off of ketones and protein, you start eating some sugar. Let's say your uncle has a birthday party and you have a couple of beers with him and a couple of slices of pizza, you're gonna blow up like 7 pounds from that because the body is not used to the carbohydrate consumption anymore, and the water retention will be insane. So pretty much I don't consume that on a daily basis anymore. I consume carbohydrates very rarely. But on protein and fat only, I'm performing the best I ever performed. I feel the best I ever felt, and I have metabolic flexibility, meaning that I can switch between two metabolisms easily. So let's say I went out for a sushi and I had a massive sushi meal. Right after the sushi meal, I can go 40 hours with no food at all and feel great, which means I just consumed 400 or 500 grams of carbs. I can go 2 days with no food and feeling great. If I did that, if I was sugar addicted, by nighttime I would be starving, meaning I would have to eat more. And if I ate more that night, where I already had a massive amount of carbohydrates, protein, and fat for lunch, well, now I'm counting calories at night again, and I'm getting fatter and fatter. That's where the problem is. Carbohydrates do make you hungry. They make you hungry. They suppress the leptin sensitivity, so your brain is not getting as much signal that you're full. When you're eating steak and eggs, your leptin sensitivity is really high. As soon as your body's full, it sends the signal to your brain through the hormone called leptin that, hey, we've had enough food, shut the appetite down, we're good. So the appetite goes down, and all of a sudden you're just talking to the person with a piece of steak on your fork, and you're just waving around. And you don't even put it in your mouth, you just sit there.
It's amazing how strong those signals are. That hormonal signal to stop eating when you are wolfing down eggs and it's delicious, and all of a sudden, like you're right, you may have one more little bite, you can't eat it. It's impossible.
You get sick of it. You don't want it. You're just talking to the other person with the half full plate. But if I tell you, hey, do you want to have some cheesecake? Yeah, sure, I'll have some. You'll have a cheesecake that suppresses the leptin sensitivity and it allows you to overeat. That's why we have a morbid obesity problem. People overeat. And that food that is really high on fat and sugar all in once is making you insulin resistant. So now when you're in an insulin resistant state, eating foods that are really high on fat and sugar and support further and further insulin resistance, which is eventually going to turn you into a diabetic, you're getting fatter and fatter. And with all that extra body fat, you're getting more pressure on your heart. You're getting more pressure in your cardiovascular system. And then you develop kidney disease because number one reason why kidneys are getting sick in the United States is high blood pressure. It's not a protein, it's the high blood pressure. We have over 2,100 studies that have been reviewed, and there was a meta-analysis that took 30 of these studies that were the most important to review all of them to find a relationship between protein and kidneys. There was none. There was actually a study that shown people with a stage 4 kidney failure who started consuming more animal protein, getting their EGFR levels better. That means the filtration of their kidneys has improved, which means that pretty much what's killing your body is all the processed food that we have in today's society, all the sugar and the trans fats, and everything that's being represented as healthy is actually not healthy. Have you seen a recommendation for the new food pyramid?
Oh, the Tufts food compass that came out, or the United States recommendations.
Yes, like the number one best food in the world was watermelon or some shit.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous, preposterous.
Cheerios was like number 3. and
Yeah.
the red meat and eggs was the last one, like
Yep.
to avoid.
Yep.
So if you are pretty much sticking to the recommendations like this, you are going to certainly experience your health going down the drain. Certainly. And if people think, oh, I can't only eat meat and eggs, and I can't only do this type of diet. All right. Let's call it you can't eat healthy. Like it's too, you don't want to diet, you don't want to be limited. Have you tried being sick? It's a lot harder. It's a lot harder, trust me on that one. Because when you're sick, Monday, you have a checkup with your GP. Tuesday, you got to go see your cardiologist. Thursday morning, you got to go for the blood work. Saturday, you got your CT. This is your life.